I'd never been a fan of the night shift, but bills needed paying, and there weren't many options available in this small town. So, there I was, working the night shift at the old, dilapidated asylum that had always stood as a dark shadow on the outskirts of town. I didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but there was something undeniably eerie about that place, especially in the dead of night. My job was simple: watch over the empty halls, keep an eye on the CCTV cameras, and make sure nobody decided to trespass or explore the dilapidated structure. It should have been a boring gig, and it was, for the most part, until that one night when things took a turn for the worse. The asylum was a labyrinthine structure, a maze of hallways and rooms that had housed the mentally ill in a bygone era. Now, it was abandoned, decaying, and a haven for urban explorers and local legends. It was one of those legends that had convinced the owners to hire a night shift guard. The legend of the Whispering Halls. The Whispering Halls, as they were called, were a series of corridors where, according to the tales, you could hear the voices of the past. Whispers and murmurs that carried the anguish and torment of the long-forgotten patients who had once roamed these halls. The stories were creepy, sure, but I chalked them up to the overactive imagination of teenagers trying to scare themselves silly. One night, as I made my rounds through the dimly lit corridors, I heard something. At first, it was a soft, almost indistinguishable murmur, like the faintest of breezes rustling through the leaves. I stopped in my tracks, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I convinced myself it was just the wind or maybe a draft in this old, drafty building. But then, the whispers grew more pronounced, and they seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. It was as if the asylum was breathing, as if it were a living, sentient being. I approached the source of the sounds, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew more distinct, and I could make out fragmented words and phrases, some incoherent, others filled with agony.
Help me, lost, so lost. The darkness, it never ends.
I shivered, convinced that someone was playing a prank on me. I called out, "Who's there?" This isn't funny, but the whispers only grew louder, as if mocking my attempts to assert authority. With trembling hands, I moved down the corridor, my flashlight cutting through the shadows. That's when I heard it, a distinct, chilling laugh that echoed through the darkness. It was not the laugh of a living person. It was cold, empty, and tinged with madness. My heart raced as I followed the sound to an old, rusted door. As I reached for the handle, the laughter abruptly ceased. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. Beyond the door lay a room that seemed to belong to another time. The walls were adorned with peeling wallpaper, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. In the center of the room was a rotting armchair, and beside it, a small, child-sized bed with tattered sheets. Toys from a bygone era were scattered around, covered in dust and cobwebs. But what drew my attention was the mirror on the wall. It was cracked and tarnished, reflecting a warped version of the room. As I looked into it, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, dark and shadowy, moved behind me in the reflection, but when I turned around, there was no one there. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever.
"She's here,"
they hissed.
"The one who waits."
I couldn't take it anymore. I fled the room, leaving the door wide open. The whispers followed me as I made my way back to the security office, my mind in turmoil. I couldn't explain what had just happened, but one thing was clear: the asylum was not as empty as it seemed. I returned to the security office, my hands still trembling. I watched the CCTV cameras, but they revealed nothing out of the ordinary. It was as if the events in the Whispering Halls had never occurred. I tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me, convincing myself that it had all been a product of my imagination. But as the night wore on, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me, something lurking just beyond the reach of my vision. Around 3 a.m., I received a call on the office phone. It was the owner of the asylum, asking if everything was okay. I hesitated for a moment, then told him about the whispers, the laughter, and the room I had discovered. He was silent for a moment, and then he said, "You should leave." Now, I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my belongings and made my way to the exit, my footsteps echoing through the deserted halls. As I reached the front door, I glanced back at the asylum one last time. That's when I heard it, the haunting laughter. It was louder than ever, and it seemed to surround me, as if it came from all directions at once. I turned to see a figure, dark and indistinct, standing in the corridor. Its laughter was cold and mirthless, and its eyes were empty voids that seemed to devour the light. I fled from the asylum, my heart pounding, and didn't stop until I reached the safety of my car. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what I had encountered that night. The asylum held secrets, dark and ancient, and I had only scratched the surface. To this day, I can't explain the events of that night, but I know one thing for certain: I'll never set foot in that place again. The whispering halls and the haunting laughter are not the stuff of legend. They are a reality that I can never forget, and a darkness that still haunts my dreams.